All right, thanks everybody for tuning in online. This is going to be our second episode of the Honest Search for Truth podcast. Today we have a professor from the Texas Tech University Philosophy Department, Dr. Joel Velasco. Dr. Velasco, could you just tell us a little bit about
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, Josh. I'm excited to be here and to see how this turns out. Like Josh said, I'm a professor in the philosophy department at Texas Tech University. I specialize in the philosophy of science, and so in particular, I work on things like evolutionary biology.
Which is all made up.
Which is all made up, yes. And the and uses of probability across scientific reasoning.
Very cool. All right, great. So what we are mostly interested in today is whether or not God exists, whether or not any religions are actually true, is there evidence for or against, and how do we know? So for you, just could you give us your background? What did you grow up believing, and what was your progression?
Sure. So I was raised in a fundamentalist evangelical Christian home. I started out at Tabernacle Christian Academy in school, learning the days of creation and doing my sword drills, which are, if you don't know, races to open the Bible as fast as possible to some various verse, which I won, by the way. I have some gold medals. And then I did eventually move into a public school, but in my memory, we always went to an Assemblies of God church. I guess I don't know for sure. It depends on exactly what you mean, but I assume that my parents are biblical literalists. They take the Bible as literally true, so the earth was created in 7 days, or 6 days, I should say. The flood is real, things like that. So I was raised that way. I certainly believed that. I never really met anyone who didn't until I think I was in high school. I had been, leading my Bible study at school and these kinds of things. I sort of went through a transition in high school. I think when you first start to question, let's say you're interested in evolutionary biology and you're looking at science, well, the first things you read are Christian authors explaining why, in fact, evolution is not true, or why this is bad, or why it's all a lie from Satan, or things like that. And it's not until I sort of first pushed into actually reading scientific authors that I really started to, take that view much more seriously. I think science was a big thing for me. That sort of really pushed me into what I now consider my view, which is that there is no God. Standard religious claims, most of them anyway, are false. Of course, not all. It depends on what they say. Different religions say different things.
Yeah.
But the sort of standard materialist view, the world is made of atoms and particles and forces and moving around and banging into each other, I think that's right.
Very cool. That's very similar to how I grew up in Sunday school. We had a class that basically showed how evolution wasn't true, and at the end there was always applause, and how could anyone possibly believe that? Then I was sort of a champion of anti-evolution throughout high school, and then I got to college, and I started reading some science textbooks, realized there were some misunderstandings, to say the least, and ended up coming around and realizing, this is like a reasonable person would absolutely agree with this. Yeah, so what was the point at which you, or was there a point at which you decided that God doesn't exist or Christianity isn't true?
So I don't think that there was a particular point. I do remember a few points, and looking back, of course, brains are very good at reconstructing false memories and stories. I remember, for example, in 11th grade, I remember talking with somebody about the flood and really starting to think, this is kind of ridiculous. But it wasn't until 12th grade, there's a particular story which I want to tell because it's kind of fascinating in retrospect. So I was actually in a philosophy class in high school which had philosophy, and each student gave a little presentation at the beginning of one of the days, and I went early on in the class, and I, for some reason, had collated. I remember reading It Didn't Just Happen, which is a sort of scientific creationist text, arguing all sorts of weird things about why the earth can't be old and things. And I had put together all of the arguments and constructed a very good argument for all of these things, that the earth is young, of course there's a God, all these kinds of things. I went into philosophy class, I just, 10 minutes, laid it all out, flabbergasted everybody in the audience, and they had nothing to say. And the teacher was like, well, are there any questions? And somebody eventually said, well, do you really believe all of this stuff? And I said, no, I'm an atheist. And I just sort of said it. And I don't think that I had ever said that before. I don't think that I had ever admitted that before, said that to anybody. Probably I did, and I just forgot it, and I've sort of coalesced my brain into this cool story. And as soon as I said it, I sort of thought, yeah, this is right, actually. This is what I recognize. I was just putting this stuff together, and the best I could do is a bunch of crap, really. So that's, if there was a moment, it was that, but I think it's probably more like, I sometimes try to make this analogy, which I'm sure is false, and I'm sorry to all my homosexual friends, but I feel like sort of coming out of the closet. When you sort of say it and announce it, you're like, oh, of course, that's right all along. It's not like I made a snap judgment. I've sort of always been like, of course, not always like that. That's exactly the false analogy. But in the sense, but I sort of, once you sort of admit it to yourself, you realize, oh, yeah, of course, this is the right thing for me.
Yeah.
And I haven't changed my mind or gone back since.
Cool. So 11th grade.
So, well, it was 12th grade that I
12th
made
grade.
that announcement.
Yes.
I don't know how fast the transition was. After 11th grade, I went to Colorado Springs to a Summit Ministries 2-week camp for sort of training future Christian leaders. So in some sense, I must have been a Christian at that time, but I think actually no, because I seem to remember going there and sort of, arguing with people and things. But the camp really had exactly the opposite effect that they want. They're supposed to go, we heard from these experts about how the biblical story of science is great, of economics is great. If you're watching Dr. David Noble, you turned me into an atheist, They did it sort of so poorly, actually, that I was convinced. And I think in my head, I had set it up as, well, look, if anyone can answer my questions, because if I go to somebody at church or go to one of my friends, they'd say, oh, well, somebody else knows the answer to that. Somebody else can explain that.
Yeah.
And here I finally went to this pinnacle of Christian education, and they spouted a bunch of nonsense. So I think, in retrospect, actually, that probably mattered more than any reading that I did on my own.
Yeah. So do you think that the trajectory of your life would have changed if you had grown up in a community with, like, theistic evolution or, like, old Earth? Yeah.
So it's hard to know. But I can say, of course, I do have a lot of friends who would, for example, they go to a Catholic church or maybe a more liberal version of Christianity, and they sort of, they think, oh, sure, Jesus is a good person, I guess. And if you ask them, they say they're a Christian. And, of course, they just never really changed. And I think they never had any reason to really question it. Whereas in my case, I was taught from a very early age that sort of everything ties together. You have to believe that there was a global flood. You have to believe that the earth is young. And so as soon as I didn't believe that, in my head, that was tied up to the evidence for the existence of God and that I should believe the moral teachings of the Bible, for example. So I pitched it all and, in a sense, was taught to think like a fundamentalist and so became a fundamentalist atheist. So I suspect it would have been quite different if if when I was 16 I had asked my pastor, I'm sort of questioning this, I wonder about this, and they said, well, that's a good question, I don't really know. Or if they had said, well, a lot of good Christians also believe in evolution or think that the earth is old. That's an interesting question, let's look into that. But instead I never got that and ended up sort of just rejecting it wholeheartely.
Yeah, that sounds just very similar to my experience. And sort of all along my journey when I was an atheist, I was sort of an atheist with that mindset, that old mindset of like trying to reach out to people or like, this really matters, so I want to spend a lot of time and invest in it. And then I'd run into some atheists who had been an atheist for a long time, and their outlook was, oh, it just doesn't matter that much,
right?
So that's sort of programmed in.
Thinking that these questions are important and that there's answers and to seek them out. Whereas other people, if you just sort of ignore it long enough, you can, right? You can just sort of ignore those questions. But I don't, right?
So anywhere on that trajectory, did you look into the cosmological argument, the fine-tuning argument, argument from conscious, any of the major ones?
I would guess that when I was in high school, I probably came across those things and read those things. And actually, in my high school philosophy class, so let's see, we used a textbook called "Does the Center Hold" by Donald Palmer, which is terrific. So I think those arguments for God would have been in there, but I don't recall, seriously thinking about those. And now, in retrospect, I think you can't really seriously think about those things until you've had all sorts of training and
Right.
in other fields, and to really just think generally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was a pretty smart high schooler, but high schoolers just are not prepared to.
Right.
I mean, they should not make the decision based on what they think is the rationally strongest argument, because that'll change next year, right?
Yeah.
When they learn more.
Yeah. So while like in high school, it seems like you can't have just the general understanding of the cosmological argument because you need to know a lot of physics. Or the same thing for the fine-tuning argument. Or for consciousness, you need a lot of philosophy. I think I had a unique experience though because when my dad fell away in high school and I like really wanted to bring him back, basically from when I was I don't know, maybe like 14 or so.
Yeah.
Like during those years when your brain is still developing and you're like sort of becoming who you are, I started doing apologetics then.
Yeah.
So I was trying to understand, the cosmological argument or like the historicity of the resurrection or like trying to figure out what theology was there. But yeah, it certainly takes a lot of time and investment to be able to think about them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to tell people that that's not worth it or that you can't learn a lot. I think you can get the gist of all of those things and actually understand the details. So, yeah, when I was in high school, I mean, I remember reading Josh McDowell on Jesus or Lee Strobel and all these kinds. So, I sort of read those arguments, and I think that I had things to say.
Yeah.
But, for example, if I was in a room with them when you're 16, you have no hope of explaining to them why their arguments are wrong. No, of course not. And even now, actually, it's an important lesson of philosophy, actually, that you really cannot trust your own judgments about, your intuitions about certain cases and sort of, you're like, you look at some argument and you're like, no, that's a terrible argument. What about this? If you came up with that in 30 seconds, you really just can't trust it.
Well, yeah.
So these things,
it takes time to
very, very
truly
smart
examine
people
something.
are on both sides of all of these arguments. So the idea that, you have the end-all conclusion about this is just clearly wrong.
Yeah, it has to be percentage, and to me, you have to go really deep to sort of adjust all of those preconceptions or, how do you really think about the Big Bang?
Right.
Can you really conceive of a singularity? Or like, if we're taking the entire universe as sort of a single object, like in the fine-tuning argument, and then you're trying to say, well, what if we change something? Like, how do you think about changing physics?
Yeah.
So, all right, so I'd like to ask you just your opinion on some of the big arguments. Cosmological argument, so origins. Many different versions. One is everything that exists has an explanation for its existence. So the universe must have an explanation. Or we could say all contingent events have a cause. All contingent events must have a cause. And everything in the universe is contingent. The universe itself is contingent. Therefore, there had to be a cause. And it had to be a cause that was not contingent itself. Therefore, there's something that's not the universe that caused the universe. I don't think you can jump straight to God from there. But what do you think about just that starting point?
So I think this is exactly one of these cases where you just cannot trust your own intuitions about these things. I think if you try to think about, the beginning of time before which there was no time, you'll never be able to understand it. If you try to think about a world that goes back forever, on the other hand, you won't be able to understand that either, right? So I think this is one of these classic situations. I think in my professional life as a professional philosopher, my considered view about things like what is really possible is that really mathematics is the best guide to what's actually possible, and that we really can't trust our intuitions about these things. So, for example, if I say, look, an infinite series of numbers going back forever, that's possible. Why couldn't time be like that? Now, you might give me some physics story about why the evidence is that time isn't like that. But the cosmological argument is meant to, at least the way it's usually portrayed, is meant to be independent of physics. Now, maybe somebody will come along and say, yeah, but we have good evidence for the Big Bang. And I think we do.
Yeah. Well, let's just throw this in there. I was at a recent lecture given by Dr. Alan Guth, who's cutting edge on the...
Yeah, inflation.
Yeah. And one of the things he said was, even if there's a multiverse, it's not infinite into the past.
Right.
It's infinite into the future. So I'll just throw in a little bit of physics there.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing too, right? So some people claim, I just don't understand inflation. I don't understand what that means, how that could work. Aren't you claiming that something goes faster than the speed of light? And he'll say, no, it's space itself. It's expanding. And frankly, I don't understand that. But I don't think that I should trust my judgment over some kind of physical model about what's actually possible. And if you look at what's actually possible out there, or at least what physicists think is actually possible, there's all sorts of models. There's models with closed time where there is no beginning. There's ends finitely in the past. There's models where the universe goes back forever. There's models where it goes back forever, but the Big Bang is the end of the observational universe or something. So which of these is right? I don't see why I should know.
All those things are possibilities.
Right.
But I still try to say what is the best leading theory right now. And
so if you do that, then if you ask around to people that you trust, I think you'll come up with, well, the best leading theory is some kind of singularity, Big Bang theory. I think we have lots of evidence for that. And now you get to this philosophical point and you say, for example, let's take the explanation one. If you say, well, everything that exists has some explanation, I don't really understand what that means. What do you mean to say that you have to explain something's existence? What if it was around forever or something? Now, in the Big Bang, it's not around forever. That's the whole point. But if you say, but we have to explain the entire universe, well, I think that's a little bit fishy. I think that our notions of explanation, causation, time, space, all of those things are sort of tied into already being in the universe with the laws we have, the way they work. I don't think it's reasonable to think you have to explain the entire universe.
Okay, but in science, one of the things we do is, we have a baseline set of intuitions. And then you look at the Earth, and your baseline is that it's flat. But then you can use tools of logic or various scientific tools to reach past that.
Right.
To figure out that the Earth is an oblate spheroid. Not round.
Yes, well,
sorry. So
spheroid is confusing.
Too much.
It's not too much. It also has bumps. Right.
Yeah, and then
there's mountains.
We can define it by its perfect shape. Anyway, so I think it's possible to pick what the best current theory is, operate based on that, be open to changing your mind if
that's right.
If the evidence changes, and then try to use our best tools to find out as much as we can.
Right.
And it seems like if you had a logic-based cosmological argument, logic has to hold in all possible worlds, right?
Yeah, so I think, but the best guide to what's actually logically necessary. So if you say something like, look, if something had a beginning, it must have a cause, outside of it or whatever.
Okay.
That sounds like you're claiming it's a logical claim. And I think our best guide to sort of what's logically possible is just mathematics. And mathematics does not guarantee that everything that had a beginning had a cause in some sort of physical way.
Does not.
Right?
Okay, so...
And this business about necessarily existing, so for another one, for example, you said, well, if the universe is contingent, it must have had a cause, but that cause couldn't be contingent, otherwise you're in the same regress.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't know that the universe is contingent. It may well be necessary.
Okay.
But let's assume it's contingent. Why does it have to have a cause at all? And I think the best you can do, you can say, well, look, it just follows by logic. But I think actually our best guides to things like, causation, explanation, whatever, are physics and mathematics, and they don't say that.
So, what physics and mathematics not say?
Well, they don't guarantee that everything that began to exist had a cause. That's not a sort of built into our empirical evidence, right?
Okay. Yeah, so
I mean,
that's
we have a
not,
perfectly good model where the Big Bang starts and nothing caused it at all.
nothing
Right.
caused it at all.
Certainly nothing
Okay, so
outside.
yeah, so you can't argue against that with math. I agree with you there. With physics, okay, so we would have to say the Big Bang is a unique event. Everything that happens after it is in a separate category, so we can't use the stuff that happened after it as evidence for something that would apply to the actual Big Bang.
Yeah, well,
Is
if
that what
you,
you're saying?
I think, for example, if you say, I have a question about physical possibility. Is it possible to have a closed causal system that satisfies certain laws of physics that are never violated, et cetera, blah, 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 and have a finite point in such that time is only, 13.4 billion years old? Answer, yes. We have such models.
We have some.
Right? We and if you
Yeah.
say, yeah, but I don't think they make sense, then you're not relying on physics anymore, right? Physics can't say that this Big Bang model or whatever doesn't make sense. That's your intuitions about the way things work.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so if we go with the standard model, if we say universe is finite into the past, is it possible to say that something non-physical was the explanation for causing that? Or if we just play with the Big Bang, and say,
is it
like,
even
we said
possible?
there,
So,
is it possible to say that there was?
well, one worry I have is you start to get into this question of what does it mean to be physical.
Yeah.
I think the most natural story here is that if anything causes a physical effect, then it itself is part of the physical.
Right.
And so, if it was true that there was some important physical principle that said everything has to have a cause, or whatever, then that would be an argument for time not having a beginning and having going back to the past, not an argument for God, a non-physical entity, beginning time. That doesn't make any physical sense. Now, that might be a supernatural event, but that's not going to be something that's sort of captured by physics.
Can I try to give a definition for the physical world?
Sure.
Just so that
we'll work with that.
Okay. The physical world is everything is the universe and all of the matter and energy contained inside of it. So the laws. So
like the observable universe or everything? Because if you mean everything, so here's the exact question I'm going to ask, right? If there is a God, I think the natural understanding of universe is that he's part of the universe.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why I'm trying to. So we could define it that way.
Yeah.
And just say everything is a physical universe, including God.
Yeah.
I would sort of prefer to have a physical universe, and this wouldn't change the arguments, it just changes the definitions.
Yeah.
To me, the physical universe is, let's just say it's the observable universe. You have the
Right.
Big Bang, all of the matter
Right.
that was there, all the
Right.
governing laws,
Yeah.
space-time explodes. That's the physical universe.
Yeah.
Is that
Well, then I
is
think
fair
that
to
if-
work with?
Sure. Then I think that anything that's part of the causal fabric, that is, if you cause things to happen in the physical universe, then you're part of the physical universe too, because you're observable in the same way, right? If you can observable, I mean, if you can observe the effects, then you're observing it.
Okay.
Right.
So then, like, what if a miracle happened? What would you call
Well,
it?
it depends on how do you define a miracle? So if there's...
I would define a miracle as changing the laws of physics.
So, again, this is just this
Right.
same question again. So,
Yeah.
if the laws of physics are something like, well, here's what we think would normally happen, and they could be violated by some supernatural thing, okay, well then miracles are sort of conceptually possible.
Yes.
On the other hand, a natural way to talk about the laws of physics are that they're just descriptions of the way the world actually is.
Yes.
And in that sense, if God, moved in and did something, then actually it would not violate the laws of nature. The laws of nature would just not be what we thought they were.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so an observational versus...
I think whether the laws are descriptions or are some kind of default, like, what would happen if there's no interference?
Correct.
So if you say the laws are what would happen if there's no interference, then it's conceptually possible that there's miracles.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, how you would know the difference is a really tough question.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you're able to change those, see how the variables change and then switch up the implications.
Well, think about an easy case. Think if you defined miracle as an impossible thing happened. Well, the natural way to understand possible is that anything that happens is possible. Even if God did it, right? So actually, that's the kind of incoherent definition that some definitions of physical law would entail that actually miracles are impossible in that strong sense, because if anything happens, it's consistent with law, because the law is just a description of what happens.
Right. Okay, great.
But I know what you mean, and I'll say miracles are possible. Right.
Right on. With your definitions, of course.
With the right definitions.
With the yeah. I agree with you on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Not to say your definitions are.
That's right.
I agree.
This is the way philosophy works, by the way.
Yeah. All right. So fine-tuning argument.
Sure.
Okay. The fine-tuning argument.
Yeah.
Basic premise: we allow the laws of physics to be something other than what they are. So the cosmological constant could be something other than what it is.
Yeah.
Then, so we say that's true for all the laws of physics.
Yeah.
And then we set up a parameter space where all the laws have their own dimension. And then we would say something along the lines of out of the set of possible physics, or out of the set of possible universes, the subset that allows for abiogenesis, so not like humans, not
just
ants.
any life.
Yeah, not praying mantises, just any life at all.
Yeah.
Out of the set of possible physics, the subset that allows for abiogenesis is very small. Okay, and it seems that if you start monkeying around with, say, gravity is actually a really bad example, but I like to use it because people can understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, gravity is like the worst thing from the physics standpoint. It's like terrible. Never use it in like
couldn't be different. Right?
In a formal argument for the fine tuning, but for the purposes of this podcast, it's fine. So let's say gravity was okay. So gravity is like 9.8 meters per second squared. And then if you jack it up to 16, or then after the Big Bang, everything would have crunched down into another singularity, and you can't have abiogenesis in a singularity. And if it was weaker, say it was 5, then everything would fizz out, you wouldn't get stars, and then you wouldn't get heavy elements, because you don't have fusion. So you would have hydrogen and helium, and you can't have life with just hydrogen and helium. All right, that's the basic argument. I actually don't agree with the fine-tuning argument myself, but it's an important one. I think everybody needs to form an opinion on it. So I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah, well, actually, the first thing I want to say is about that very last thing you said. Everybody needs to form an opinion on it. I probably should just go back and change my answer about the cosmological argument. The first thing that I think about that and about fine-tuning, my first pass with all fields, if somebody starts talking about the law, or somebody starts talking about sociology or psychology, or something that, I'm a smart person, I know some things about, but many, many people know much more than I do. And so when I look around at professional cosmologists, some of them are sort of impressed by the cosmological argument, but not many. Fine-tuning, similarly, people that would know if the universe is fine-tuned sometimes are impressed. Some people are. I've met professional physicists who are like, fine-tuning right there, there's a God. But most aren't. Now, one explanation for that is that most just have this hatred for God in their heart and they don't care, something like this.
Yeah.
But I think the more natural explanation is that if you actually understand the details of what's going on, it's no longer a persuasive argument, and it just depends on what you already thought. So if you already thought there was a God, then you're going to look at these details and say, look, further proof. And if you already thought there wasn't, the argument's not good enough to be convincing. So that's my sort of first pass thing. Now, if you actually ask me what I think about the argument, we can talk about that, but
I want to take a second to respond to that, because
Yeah.
I actually don't agree with you on that.
Okay.
I think a lot of physicists and cosmologists are just interested in their research.
Yeah, right.
You know,
Right.
and
That's true.
when I'm doing neuroscience, I'm interested in protein
Yeah.
channel and like
Right.
channels and like.
But
getting
you're also a
structures
human
and-
being, and so if
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
an obvious argument, so for example, it's not like they've just never come across the cosmological.
Yeah.
Somebody has put it to them in their face and said, "Doesn't the Big Bang demand a cause?" And they say, "I've thought about the Big Bang for 20 years, and I think no." Now,
Yeah.
it's true.
Well-
they may not be particularly interested
Mhm.
in sort of religious claims or whatever, but they are a human being. I mean,
Well,
they do think about these things and
I
they
would
have
like-
opinions.
I would like to think
Right.
so, but
It's true.
still,
Some people
my
make bad
ex-
judgments. Yeah,
My experience with scientists
Yeah.
has
has taught you to not trust them. Just kidding.
no. It's not me that I like them and they're the
Yeah.
coolest people ever.
Right.
But not necessarily that
Right.
they're interested in going out of their way
Right.
to understand a philosophical argument.
That's true.
Even if it's related to their
But some
field.
of these, I mean, even the sophisticated versions are pretty simple to present. I think
Yeah.
they understand what the arguments are.
Yeah,
Right?
but,
So maybe we'll get to this, but take
Yeah.
like the design argument for God's existence. Biologists are not so impressed. Physicists sometimes are, right?
Okay, but
actually
we would,
biologists are not too impressed, right? So people
Yeah,
that sort of
yeah.
understand the details that are supposed to make you the most impressed typically
yeah,
aren't.
but we'd have to do a survey. We'd have to
do a survey, but I can tell you for
Yeah.
certain that it's not 100%. It's not,
I agree.
There are
I agree.
definitely very smart, rational scientists who understand all of the details of the,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
who think this is not a good enough argument for God.
Yeah,
So,
that's totally fine. That's
My
cool.
first pass is
That's
to
right
say
on.
I don't really understand what's wrong with fine-tuning argument, but I'm not
Yeah.
convinced by it because they're not either, right?
Yeah, but so for me,
Yeah.
I'm sort of trying to become an expert in.
Yeah, right. Well, then
so I
we'll
can
move
figure
on. So
those
I'll
out.
talk about it.
So I did my honors thesis on fine tuning.
Right.
Because I didn't want to have to punt to like
Right.
if you're gonna go to an expert
Might as well
for
start, right.
a colonoscopy, by all means, go to the expert.
Right.
And
Right.
when it comes to science, I'm completely on board with defer to the
Yeah.
experts. It just seems like
Yeah.
when you're mixing in philosophy,
It's true.
sometimes
Yeah.
the scientists just aren't the best philosophers.
That's true. So I'll say what I think about fine-tuning, I
All
guess.
right, right on.
So there's a couple of stages of the argument, actually. So the first stage is just to ask whether the universe is in fact fine-tuned. And
Yes.
here I think that the sort of first pass evidence says yes, but that actually we don't really know.
Right.
So for example, it may be that there are no other possible laws of nature. Right? Maybe the way the universe began, it's just the case that this is fixed, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's one branch.
That's one branch.
And
or,
if we decide
yeah,
physics is static, then
right.
yeah, the
There's
argument
lots of
is-
ways to
is
go.
not.
Or they could be
Yeah.
infinitely variable, and then there's all sorts of problems with probabilities.
Right.
So as Josh will explain this to you later on some other episode. There's lots of possibilities, but let's say that it does look like it's fine-tuned. That is, it looks like there's a lot of possibilities, and we're in one where there's life, and that really wasn't a priori all that probable. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now what? What is
Yeah.
that exactly supposed to be an argument for? Is that supposed to be an argument that the universe was designed? Well, then you would need to give some reason to think that if it was designed, it's more likely to be the way it is. Or let's say it's just an argument for God's existence. You'd have to give some argument that, well, God existing actually makes it more likely to look like this than like something else. So let me give you a trivial example. In one sense, the fact that it's fine-tuned makes it hard for life to exist. So if there was a God and God wanted people to exist, why wouldn't he make it easy? Why wouldn't he create a world where lots of different constants, right? If the strong force were a lot weaker or stronger, still, you'd have atoms, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no, God can create the world any way he wants, presumably, and still lead to life. So if that's really true, it's not clear to me that a specific outcome could be evidence for God. That is, if, right? I mean, think of it the other way. If life turned out to exist, but 90% of the possible things could lead to life, you wouldn't take that as evidence against God. You'd say, well, it's consistent. There could be a God or there could be not. Mm-hmm. Well, if one direction is not evidence against God, then the other direction can't be evidence for. Right?
Interesting.
The right answer, if you develop some sort of formal probability model, is that you need to know well, would God make this world more likely or less likely? And I think the answer to that is we don't know. We have no particular reason for thinking. Now, if you think that you understand the mind of God and the way He would, if you think, well, I can see why God would make the laws of nature like this. I can't see why He'd do it any other way. Well, my hat's off to you. But I don't think you know that.
Okay.
Right.
All right. I didn't understand everything you just said.
Okay.
Could you?
Luckily, it's recorded on video.
Oh yeah. Everyone else can just rewind and.
That's
be like,
right.
What
That's
did
right.
Dr. Velasco just
Can
say?
I go through that again?
For my sake.
Sure.
Could you explain it to me again?
Sure. So let's here's this fact, which we're just presuming we've already passed the first stage. The fact is, there are, let's pick some numbers, 1,000 different ways the laws of nature could be,
Yes.
and only one way
Okay.
of those allows for the possibility of life.
Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Let's imagine that that's fact. Now we ask, is that evidence for something? Is that evidence for whatever? Okay.
Okay.
Well, to know whether it's evidence, you have to know whether, let's say, evidence for X. It's evidence for X if X being true makes that fact more likely.
Okay.
Right.
And hit me with that last part again.
So, well, this is obviously it's a particular definition of evidence. But,
Okay.
So let's say that I win the lottery 7 times in a row.
Right.
Okay. And you say, boy, that is really unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you have this model. It turns out there's all these ways the lottery could have gone. It's a really low probability. Okay. Is that evidence that the lottery was rigged in Josh's favor? Answer, no. Because if it was rigged in Josh's favor, that would have made the outcome, I win 7 times, actually less likely. Right? Now, that's evidence that it was rigged in my favor, or evidence that the person knew what was going to happen. So, right, in order to be evidence for the rigged outcome,
Right.
the thing would have to actually make the rigged outcome more probable. Right? Okay, so that's just a basic principle of evidence.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you say, so the outcome that most possible states of the world don't lead to life. We're in one that does. Okay, so that's the outcome. Is that evidence for God's existence? If you say yes, then you must be saying that if God exists, that outcome is more probable than if He didn't.
Okay.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be evidence for God.
Yeah.
Okay. Now here's my claim, and people when you point that out or everybody says, well, yeah, it is true. They say, yeah, that if there was no God, there wouldn't be life. And I said, no, the question is not whether there's life. The question is whether it's the fine tuning of life, right? The 1 out of 1,000 outcomes
Right.
leading to life.
Right.
Okay. Now imagine there was no God. What would it be like? Who knows? Imagine there was a God. What would it be like? Well, I actually also think we don't know. Right? Even if you think, well, it would lead to life, there's lots of ways God could have created life. Why would He use a fine-tuned universe to do it? For example, He might use a extremely relaxed laws of physics world, where maybe He would create a world where He doesn't allow nothing is up to chance. In fact, the laws of physics are fixed. There's only one way they could be. Why wouldn't He do that? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
right? So the fact that our laws are both flexible and in that range only a small number lead to life, I don't think is obviously evidence for God.
Okay. Cool. So I also disagree with the fine-tuning argument.
Okay.
But I can go into my reasons for that another time.
Okay.
For now, we probably have time for one more.
Sure.
All
You
right.
pick.
All right, I will. Okay, what I want to talk to you about is, does the color green exist?
Okay.
Does the color green exist?
Well, color is complicated. If you're trying to, maybe you should just give your argument for the existence of God or something. Right? I guess
No.
you're trying to argue. So your YouTube
so,
visitors will have seen your argument from screens. Or
Yes,
something, right?
yes.
Okay.
So this is, Dr. Velasco and I did a segment about a month ago on the screen argument, and one of the crucial points had to do with the color green.
Yeah.
And our meeting was cut short, and it's been eating me.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, this is another case of massive professional disagreement.
Uh-huh.
You'd think, everybody goes around, everybody says that's green, this is not.
Yeah.
Okay,
green
but the
screen.
professional
It's
philosophers
actually a
will.
mountain.
Okay, that's right.
Gotcha.
The professional philosophers will tell you, in fact, there are a lot of theories of ultimately what underlies the metaphysics, and then you add
Okay.
sort of language on top. So,
Okay.
is green
Let
a
me-
property of an object, or is it
Okay.
in our head that we project onto objects? I mean, I don't know.
Okay. So
I'll pretend I'm a projectivist if that'll help you. So that
Okay.
means that no actual objects are green. Green is something that we project onto the object. So, for example, if there were no conscious agents in the world, there would be no green. That's a good way to think of it.
if there if there were no conscious
If there were no
agents,
conscious
then
agents, there would be no green. That's
Yes.
a projectivist view of color.
Yes.
A realist view of color is that grass is green even if there were no people that ever looked at it, or
Okay.
animals.
And that
or
view is
anything.
totally ridiculous.
I don't think it's ridiculous at all.
No. Okay. Wait. Okay. So.
Okay.
I've drawn
Okay,
a green
so we're
dot.
no longer the green screen. Now we have a green dot.
Now we have some
Right.
definitive green here.
Okay.
Okay. So you said was it the projective?
Projectivist projects the
So, yeah,
property
okay.
onto the object
So
and
if there
sort
were
of
no
represents
conscious-
it as being green.
If there were no conscious agents,
Yeah,
there would be no green.
that's right.
Okay, I like that
Okay.
because it seems like in our field of vision right now, there's a green dot.
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
and that's just how I'm defining green.
Okay.
Is like the color of that dot right there.
Okay, sure.
And the greenness itself exists in a sense, right?
Well, the green would, in that situation,
Okay.
the green is a property of an object. The object, the dot, has a certain property.
Yes.
Just like it has a size, it also
Okay,
has
it's
a color.
property. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So perhaps what I've been struggling with is getting the right terminology or the
Yeah.
right way of saying exist.
Yeah.
And maybe you can
Yeah.
help me with that. So I haven't done any
What a
philosophy.
conundrum.
In the future,
Yeah.
I want to do some philosophy, maybe like get a master's or something
Yeah.
in philosophy of mind. But from what I
Yeah.
like, so I'm trying to get up there. But
Yeah.
to me, there's a sense in which that green exists.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it's right there. Like
Right.
my field of vision exists.
Sure.
Or okay. So then, in that context, do you agree that green exists? Or is the context just
Sure,
wrong?
we'll say yes.
Uh-huh.
We'll say that the dot is green, so the property of green exists, or something like that.
Okay, cool. So
Or
th-
the
would that
property
be
is
better?
instantiated in that location, or something like that.
Okay, so I can say it that way and be more technical.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, properties existing is weird, right? But, green existing is weird. It's objects that exist, but people talk about properties being instantiated or something.
Well, okay, but I'm talking about it existing as a mental state.
So I
Okay.
think I know what you want to say. So let's take the situation where you falsely think something. So
Right.
it looks green to you,
Yes.
okay, but the wavelengths underneath it, blah, 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 okay. So what's the situation there? Is it green or is it red and you think it's green?
Yeah.
Well, that's a question about what you think about color. But the projectivist is that you're projecting green onto the object, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it has the underlying wavelengths, which ordinarily would produce red under, say, normal light,
Okay.
the fact that it looks green is that you're projecting green onto
Okay.
it, not red or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So it seems to me like the wavelengths of light are irrelevant. Like say.
Well,
under-
there's some sort of causal story about what they normally lead to.
Uh-huh.
But in the particular case, there's all sorts of these, I think they're called mesmers and various kinds of things. So they're, different underlying physical substructures can lead to humans saying the same thing,
Yes.
namely green.
Okay,
right?
cool. Yeah.
So that's an argument that if you think that, well, it's the underlying substructure, those things are really different colors, or is it about the conscious agent, they're really the same color, that'll sort of tell you what kind of theory of color you have.
Okay.
So, let's
on.
imagine it's all in the head.
Okay.
So
Right
then
on.
they're the same color, even though they are structurally different underneath. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Excellent. That's
Right.
probably all we have time for.
Oh, okay. I
Really-
thought you were going to ask me about mental images or something.
Oh.
Which, by the way, recent article in the New York Times and other things. So there's been this condition known for a while, but it's recently named called aphantasia. which is a small subset of people who cannot form mental images. So
Whoa.
they see just fine. They look. They say, this dot is green.
No way.
But for example, if their eyes are closed, they cannot imagine the color green.
Really?
They don't know what their spouses look like. They don't, all those kinds of things.
No way.
And they get around just fine. In fact, many of them live their lives, they're 25, they didn't realize that other people do form mental images. Because if you ask them how many windows are in their house, they know the answer because they know various kinds of propositional things. You might pick out the answer by closing your eyes and thinking about it, but they don't. But they can still get the answer.
That's very interesting.
So it shows that, for example, normal vision is not you look at the object and then sort of form this mental image and then look at that, because after all, their normal vision is totally normal. They just lack some other ability, mental imaging. So there you go.
And they all have red hair.
I don't think that's true.
Probably gonna edit that one out, but
all right.
Okay. I paused for a second to make it easy to edit that out.
Okay.
But I couldn't resist. Anyway, another pause.
Filled with satanic longings.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, pause. Okay, and we just edited something out. Okay. Really fast. 2 things you wish the public understood about philosophy.
Okay, well, so I'll do the sort of point-counterpoint thing. So philosophy is not just sitting around in your room at midnight sort of making stuff up or thinking about the big questions or whatever. It's a real discipline, professional discipline. It makes progress. People do research. There's better and worse views, good and bad arguments, right? So that's the first step. The second thing is, actually, philosophy is a lot of fun, and you can sit around and do it and just think about stuff, and there's better or worse arguments. But you might as well do it right while you're in your dorm room at 1 a.m. talking to your friends.
Right on.
So,
2 things you wish, since you do philosophy of science, 2 things you want the normal, general, non-professor person to understand about science.
Okay. Well, I'll do the same point-counterpoint thing. So, first, science doesn't prove things or claim to prove things. Scientific theories change over time. That's not an argument that we were morons before or anything like that. Science is not out to prove things. But that being said, it's very important to understand that we in fact have tons of evidence for many scientific claims. So they're not out to prove. So it's not like we have a mathematical proof that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. But it would be a mistake to say, you can't prove it. I'll tell you the story whereby it's not. Well, you're right, I can't prove it. But I can prove it in the real sense of just giving you tons and tons and tons of evidence, such that it would be completely irrational to reject that unless we got more evidence which overturned that. But we're not going to.
Right on.
Okay.
All right, and then last thing, in less than 20 seconds and with 3 words, picture yourself as a Christian, solve the problem of evil. Timer started.
Soul-building defense.
All right, and that's all we have. Thank you for tuning in to the show. That's the best response to that I've ever received. And so we're probably going to have to get you like a ice cream gift card or something. And then we'll treat it as a king of the hill. If anyone can do better, then we'll get them a slightly better ice cream or something.
I'm pretty confident no one can do better.
Yeah. All right. Once again, thanks for tuning in. This has been the Honest Search for Truth podcast. I hope you found this helpful on your own search. And good luck figuring it out for yourselves.
Thanks for having me.